Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, which features stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life story for present-day listeners and for the generations to come. Our entire collection is available at voicesofoklahoma.com. By subscribing to our podcast, you will be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. So now listen to another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com.
Bob McCormack was one of Tulsa, Oklahoma's premier photographers. A native of Pompey, New York, just a few miles east of Syracuse, Bob's family moved to Lathrop, Missouri while Bob was still a child. Bob came to Tulsa during the Great Depression. He spent his first night in Tracy Park. The next morning, he went to the Tulsa World, where Eugene Lorton hired him immediately and sent him to Claremore because Will Rogers' plane had crashed, killing Rogers and Wiley Post. Celebrities, it so happened, were always McCormack's favorite subjects. When movie theaters were still showplaces, a number of movie stars came through Tulsa for premieres and promotional tours. McCormack met them at the train station and backstage. He took a job at Douglas Aircraft as its chief photographer. 4 years later, he opened a studio of his own. His work has appeared in national publications such as Life, Collier's, Sports Afield, National Geographic, and many others. He covered the opening of Philbrook Museum in 1939 for the Associated Press. Bob McCormack died April 4, 2003. Bob's son John became a very accomplished photographer and tells the story of his father on the oral history website, voicesofoklahoma.com.
Today's date is May 15th, 2019. So, John, would you state your full name, please?
I'm John Bonham McCormack.
I got to ask you about Bonham. Where does that come from?
That is my mother's maiden name.
Okay. Your date of birth?
November 4th, 1948. That is Will Rogers' birthday also.
Oh, yes. And what is your age?
I am 70 years old, and that is a biblically significant time in my life.
Why? Should I ask you why?
We should all ask why every day.
Okay.
Say thank you, God.
Yes. And we are recording this interview in the facilities of voicesofoklahoma.com. Where were you born?
I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in St. John's Hospital, and I was born at 9:40 in the morning.
Brothers or sisters?
I have a sister who's older, born in 1945, Nancy, and we all grew up in the business. We lived within the business. Bob and Betty McCormack's Bob McCormack Photography until I was 11 years old. We lived within the business.
Within the business, meaning?
The photography studio was in the front of our house on South Boston. The dark room where I went in to kiss my daddy goodnight was formerly a bedroom, and then we lived behind and above everything else.
All right. Let's talk about your mother. Your mother's name, her maiden name, where she was born and grew up.
Elizabeth Bonham McCormack, born in her mother and father's home when they were 40 years old. She was the only child of Vernie and Harry Bonham, who were born in 1878. And when they were 40 years of age, they were finally blessed with a little baby girl, Betty. She was born in the same house that her father was born in.
And where was that?
Lathrop, Missouri, the mule capital of the world.
Lathrop, Missouri. And describe her personality. What was she like?
She's very smart. She wasn't an only child, so she was quite authoritative, but she did it with great love.
And then your father's name?
Robert Merwin McCormack. Robert Merwin McCormack was named, the middle name was because of his doctor. The doctor who delivered him in Pompey, New York, was Dr. Merwin, which has a significance to it. And then that's a whole other story. But Pompey, New York, also was the birthplace of the mother of Sir Winston Churchill.
Oh. And then we'll talk about your father more, but what was his personality like?
He was a generous, loving human being. I miss him every day.
Yeah.
He and my mother were a perfect pair.
Yeah.
He let her do all the accounting, and he was the artiste, and he never had a crossword. I never heard him curse. I did hear my mother curse on occasion.
Right. About you, first school you attended?
I went to Robert E. Lee School at 21st in Cincinnati.
Which is now Council Oaks.
It will always be Robert E. Lee in my heart and in my mind. By the way, did you know that even the great American native Olympian gold medalist Jim Thorpe played football on that field at Lee Elementary School?
I did not know that.
That was Lee Stadium, which is where TU also had their football games at first.
And junior high?
I went to Edison Junior High and Senior High. Graduated in 1967.
And then on to college?
I went on to the University of Kansas. In between the senior year, I did take a summer short study course of 4 weeks at St. Andrews University in Dundee, Scotland. And that was a terrific journey and a very good learning experience. It's the only time I've ever been to Scotland, but because of my last name, I felt like I was home.
And why did you go there?
It was a study course that was organized by a Tulsa teacher, Martha Cole. She took 20 students from Tulsa there for that trip. There were 250 Americans, all met in New York City, boarded a plane on July 3rd, arrived in Scotland on July 4th, a little bit late, but that school had gone out of their way to prepare corn on the cob for all of we Yankees.
For the 4th of July celebration. Isn't that great?
Yeah, it was.
That's great. And so she was with what school?
She was taught honors English at Edison High School.
And so it was out of Edison you took that.
Yes.
What a wonderful experience, and how grateful to her.
It was a great experience, and I shall never forget it.
Now, when you went on to college, what was your intent?
Well, I wanted to be a dentist. I actually wanted to sooner or later specialize in orthodonture, and I was advised by my counselor at Edison High School, Mr. Alexander, who had also attended KU, University of Kansas, that I should go up there because there was no dental school in Oklahoma then, and there was one in Kansas City. Matter of fact, most of the dentists in Tulsa had been graduates of that school. It still is up there, and so I took all the pre-med courses, the 20 hours of chemistry and the biology, and then even actually changed in my senior year and spent an extra semester getting a degree in journalism, which I'm so glad that I did that. I actually did it because I was told that they wanted a more well-rounded student and not someone who was majoring in the sciences. So I thought, well, that would be a good one, and they also would accept the 10 hours of Latin that I'd already taken at KU in lieu of 16 hours of another foreign language. So I wound up in journalism and had a degree in public relations and journalism, and enjoyed that time and learned so much more about the English language.
So what about being a dentist?
Well, I started applying. The year that I graduated, OU opened up their first dental school, and it was really unbeknownst to me. But when I approached them, they had 5 places left, and I definitely needed to be a woman, and it would have helped if I'd have been part Indian or Afro-American. But I was not going to get in there that year. I went to other schools down at Baylor in Dallas and Emory in Atlanta, and it's the same thing. I needed to wait. So I came back home, and when I came back home, I started working along with my mom and dad, and enjoyed it so much that I gave up the dentistry. I had never taken pictures professionally. I really didn't know much about photography except for that I watched it all of my life and was involved, but the mechanics of operating a camera at that point in time, I really had very little knowledge.
And it just never sunk in that you should be interested in it.
Right.
You weren't naturally interested as a younger person.
No, not really. I enjoyed it, but I really felt like I wanted to be a dentist, an orthodontist.
And so do you ever wonder?
By the time I was 40, I realized that I would have been just a nervous wreck as a dentist or as an orthodontist. If someone had bleeding gums, I probably would have gone to their home and held their hand until it quit. The other thing is I had so much fun with my mother and dad, and my mother died prematurely at the age of 60, so I was with her the last 7 years of her life, working alongside her and my dad, and that was wonderful.
Did you know she was dying?
No. She became ill the last year. She had breast cancer.
Yeah. So let's begin to talk now about Mr. McCormack,
Yes.
because we're going to look at many, many images here. And how was he introduced to photography?
My father, Bob McCormack, and there were 4 brothers and 1 sister. They all grew up in Lathrop, Missouri, and their back fence neighbor was a man by the name of Gerald Cross. He was a federal judge, as was his father before him, and he was an amateur photographer. And this would have been back in the late teens, early 20s, and he taught all of my dad's siblings and my father photography. And my father, I had lunch with him almost every day, and even in my father's 80s, he lived to be 89 almost. He was 2 months shy of 89. He still said that Gerald Cross was the finest, most competent photographer that he had ever known, and that he owed everything to his knowledge that he had passed on to my father.
So that was would have been in his high school years, your father's high school? How did he get from New York to Lathrop, Missouri?
He had horrible breathing problems with asthma, and the doctor said, you need to take him to the desert. And by the time they got to Missouri, which is where my grandfather and grandmother's families were from, Warrensburg, Missouri, he started doing just fine. And so they wound up staying in Missouri, which is really back home for so many of them. There was a McCormack farm in Warrensburg.
How does he begin to look at this in high school? Did he go on to college, or your father? Did he begin?
1 semester, but this was during the Great Depression, and his family certainly couldn't afford even that. But he did spend 1 semester. He was a great athlete. He was a quarterback on his conference-winning team. As a matter of fact, all 4 brothers at one time played together on the same team.
And for what school?
Lathrop Mules.
The Lathrop Mules.
You'll see a picture of them.
And it was at a college then?
No.
Oh, that was high school.
No, he went to Warrensburg State Teachers College for 1 semester.
We're talking about the 30s.
Yeah, he came to Tulsa in 1935 at the age of 21. His birthday's June 3rd, and he was 21 years of age when he came to Tulsa to seek employment, specifically with the Tulsa World.
All right, so he knew he had to come to Tulsa. He could have gone to Kansas City or some other big cities as well, but he chose Tulsa.
I think he was a very brilliant man, and I think he saw the writing on the wall. This was the oil capital of the world. I think he left one power capital, the mule capital of the world, and came to the oil capital of the world. Both very powerful.
So in 1935, he takes a train out here, I guess?
Yes, it's the same train that I and my sister would take. We visited every summer that same house that my mother was born in and that my grandfather was born in. We spent our summers up there, my sister and I. It was wonderful. We were so blessed. And that train would leave Tulsa early in the morning from the old train station downtown and arrive in Kansas City at noon. And my grandparents would pick us up there. The same train would return to Tulsa about 6 o'clock and get into Tulsa around 11 o'clock at night. And he came into Tulsa about 11 o'clock on August 14th, 1935, had no money in his pocket. He did walk over to Tracy Park, which he had heard was a good place to spend the night, And he said that there were hundreds of people in that park. It was hot. There was not a green blade of grass nor a green leaf on the trees. It was hot and dry, and people were seeking air because there was no air conditioning. So they would get out into the open air. He felt comfortable there. The next morning he went in to see Eugene Lorton and told him the story, and he kind of knew about him anyway.
He knew about, you mean Eugene? No.
That Mr. Lorton, Bob had written a letter and informed him of what he knew about photography. And on that morning, when he went in to see him, he said, "Well, Bob, you are accomplished, and we need you right now. We want you to go to Claremore and Oologah, Oklahoma, because Will Rogers and Wiley Post have just died in a plane crash." So that was my father's very first job, the very first day that he walked on to that career.
Do you know what kind of camera he had with him?
I do not know at all. I would say it would have been the largest format camera that the Tulsa World was probably working with. I've seen some negatives from different times back then, but those did not survive. Matter of fact, a lot of the things that the papers did not survive, they just kept discarding things as it piled up in their storage room. But as I say, my father enjoyed working with large format. 4x5 inch would have been ideal to carry around for him, and that camera was invented that I started with was the Speed Graphic, which is still, in my estimation, the best camera that I've ever worked with. It offered so much in utility in the way you could focus and straighten the lines within the actual camera itself.
So where does he live then after he meets Mr. Lorton, and then where does he go to live?
He wound up staying at the YMCA, and that was a building that I think is gone now. If it's still there, they've probably redone something to it. It was, I'm going to say, near First Street, the original downtown YMCA. And the reason I say that is because that was his first night really in Tulsa. His last night in Tulsa was at the downtown YMCA. He had low blood pressure, and he always stayed an athlete, always kept exercising, and at 89 almost, his routine of exercise was the hot tub or the steam room at the downtown Y, and then a massage. And that last night, which he did go on and live another day, he got into the hot tub by himself, and because of his low blood pressure, he just fainted and went under. He still survived for 24 hours. I think about that. It was shocking at the time. I had just spent that Wednesday afternoon at 4:30 with the new general manager of the downtown Y, a nice young man. And when I finished taking his portrait, which was for the Kiwanis Club, I took him in because my father belonged to the Kiwanis Club, downtown Kiwanis Club. I said, "Dad, this is the new general manager of the downtown Y." And so they talked for about 5 minutes. And then before this man left, I put my arm around him and walked him out to the front and said, "Now look after my dad. He's fainted twice down there in the last 18 months. And he says, "Oh, we're always looking after him. We've got signs up everywhere." I said, "He's not going to pay attention to a sign." And an hour and a half later, I got a phone call. "Your dad's had an accident." He survived that. He was still breathing when they got him to the hospital. And Dr. Bo Farmer was who'd been at St. John's all of his career as the emergency room doctor. I had his daughter's wedding that Saturday. That afternoon, as we were getting ready for his daughter's wedding, he says, "Your dad was still breathing. His heart was still beating when they brought him in. We rolled him over and water came out." He said his temperature was 106 degrees. And he stayed on. And the next morning they called me from the emergency, what do they call that, where they keep
ICU?
ICU, and they called about 5 in the morning and said, your father's blood pressure's dropping, you better get up here. And so I went up there, and I walked into his room. They had him seated up with a respirator on him, which I knew he wouldn't like. And there was about a 4'6" nun who was probably 90 years old herself, going back and forth around his bed, talking to him. She said, Bob, when you get to the pearly gate, you be sure and get a picture of St. Peter and John. And as I walked into the room, he saw me and he sat up and put his hand out. So I went over and grabbed his hand. I said, lay back down, Dad. You're going to be just fine. Don't get upset here. The doctor came in, a wonderful woman doctor who I still would love to write a letter to. She came back out with me, and she didn't say anything. She hugged me. She said, we need to get your father off of that respirator. And I said, I want that. I want him off there. I want God in control. So at noon that day, they took him off, and he finally quit breathing. His new wife, who had been one of my mother's best friends, and her 2 daughters and myself stood around that bed and held hands and gave a prayer of thanks for his life. It was a beautiful life, well lived.
Yeah. How old was he when he died?
He was 2 months from being 89.
And that would have been in the year?
2003. He was born in 1914.
About Betty, your mother, they had started a relationship before he left Mule Country,
right.
As you call it.
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah, they were.
And so she knew he was coming to Tulsa to get a job and looking forward to moving to Tulsa then, right?
Yes, but in those days they didn't stay together. There was always a chaperone when she would come to Tulsa that she stayed with. Tom and Frances Leach is what I remember most of the time. And they looked after her.
And so that took a number of years then before they finally got married, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it was 1940 before they married. So during the Depression, you just didn't strike out.
Well, then during the war years, was he with the Tulsa World? Did he get other employment?
He was there until August 15th, 1942, which is very interesting because he came to Tulsa August 15th. He started that career with Douglas in the war on August 15th, and the war ended on August 15th. And when the war ended, that place closed down. There was no more work there, not at first.
At Douglas Aircraft.
Right.
And what kind of work did he do at Douglas Aircraft?
He was the head of the photography department. There were over 20 people within his department, but that's how they communicated. This was before television, certainly before computers. As he said in a newspaper article in 2001, that there are pictures that he's so very proud of that he had taken, that he had captured, that he had created throughout his life. But the very most important pictures were never really seen by the public. They were the pictures that showed people who had never been in a factory before how to put together parts for those planes of war, for the attack aircraft and for the bombers. They used photography to demonstrate on workbenches and on boards in front of their work areas how to assemble aircraft at Douglas.
So there were blueprints, but they couldn't read those blueprints, I suppose, and so your father took pictures, to show them how to assemble.
Exactly. There was no recording device more easily done than that. So it was very important.
So that was his full-time job then for Douglas, doing that kind of work.
Yes, and that building is almost a mile long, and it has no windows because of security. And there's an interesting story. I'll go ahead and talk about that 35 millimeter. Mrs. Roosevelt came to Tulsa to inspect that plant, and I think it was 1940. She had ridden the train to Tulsa. My dad was asked to go by the paper to take a picture of her at the train station. And he took the very best equipment they had, which was an 8 by 10 view camera, 8 inches by 10 inches view. He said it was crowded, of course. Mrs. Roosevelt would attract a huge crowd. It was hot, and it took him a little bit of time to organize because he had to put that camera up with the tripod in the crowd, put the cape over his shoulders, focus her and compose that shot on the ground glass underneath the cape with a magnifying glass to get it sharp. And when he finally got ready to take the picture, he used flash powder to light the scene. So all of a sudden, poof, that flash powder goes off, and Mrs. Roosevelt looked at my dad and she said, "Oh, how quaint." She said, "You know, the boys back in Washington, D.C. have these new little cameras that go click, click." And so my dad went back to Eugene Lorton and said, "Mr. Lorton, we're going to have to get some 35 millimeter cameras." And by the way, that camera, my dad did wind up with that camera, and it's in the same collection that we donated to the University of Tulsa. There's over 700 cameras in that collection, but that sits there proudly, still available for a museum one day. TU could certainly have a camera museum.
And we should say that was Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the wife of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States. So he was actually working for the Tulsa World then when he did that. Okay.
Yes.
So then how many years at Douglas Aircraft?
Till the end, from
Till the war was over in 1945.
Yeah. It's one of the few questions that I ever really asked him was about the Second World War, and I asked him one day, because these aren't things that a kid asks his dad much, but as I got a little older and we were visiting one day, I said, "Dad, I know you would love to have learned how to fly, as so many of your friends had learned and wanted to be in the Air Force. How come you didn't do that?" And he said, "Well, I attempted it, but they told me, 'No, Bob, we need you more here in Tulsa.'" And so that's...
So he had offered to be of service during the war,
Yes.
and he was doing war duty, they felt. And he sure was, right?
Well, and you'll see it in one of the pictures, Samuel Borstein was a very highly honored legal mind who had moved from Atlanta, Georgia in 1917 to Tulsa. And he loved photography. And he had met my father and thought a lot of him and got to know him so well. And there's a picture that he took of my dad and gave it to him in February of 1942. And on the back of that photograph is a handwritten note that says, "The safety of a country today depends upon the inaudible shots of intrepid photographers." Well, that's a rather interesting statement, but as I look at it today, I think how he was getting my father ready to fight the war behind the lines, but at a very important place in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at the Douglas War Factory. And as a lawyer could only put it in such poetic terms, an intrepid photographer with inaudible shots. And I'll speak more on Samuel Borstein, because that story is also a continuing wonderful story.
So then he set up his own business here in Tulsa.
Yes, he and Betty. She's very important.
Well, he gets
as
to
we all
take
know.
pictures, and she was the manager, and she
Yes.
was the accountant, and,
Yes.
and all that kind of thing. And they
She-
were a great team then, weren't they?
She dealt with the customers and on that other end.
Didn't in that time period he caught the attention of some national magazines?
Oh yes, yes. He wound up. Matter of fact, actually at Douglas, he did a beautiful color portrait of one of the generals, and I can't think of the name.
Was it General Henry Arnold?
I think it was.
General.
Hap. Is it Hap Arnold?
His nickname was Hap.
Yeah, and he wrote a note to my dad saying that was the best portrait he had ever had made. It was a color too. So that and
Let me just say, because I looked him up, he was held the grades of General of the Army and General of the Air Force. He was an aviation pioneer, commanding general of the U.S. Army Air Forces, the only U.S. Air Force general to hold 5-star rank, and the only officer to hold a 5-star rank in 2 different U.S. military services.
wow.
I just learned about him, and it's fun to know those kind of names. And so he took his photo, and the general said it's the best he'd ever seen.
Yes, and that's a nice compliment.
Absolutely, from such an accomplished man.
There is a somewhere. I gave it to TU something my father had written about himself when he was seeking a master's in photography degree, and I believe it talks about that in there. I haven't seen that in a long time.
Okay, who was seeking a master's in
My dad, he is a master. That is bestowed by other masters.
It's not a school thing, it's in
No.
the business.
Yeah.
And didn't Life magazine feature a photo of your father's
You know,
general?
Yeah, well, I think so.
Gen-
I'm not real sure, John.
No, I'm going to tell you then. I'll ask you of General George Patton, who was here, visited the Spartan School of Aeronautics, and he took a picture for Life magazine.
Dad told me the story that when General Patton came to Tulsa, he visited a barracks somewhere, and that Dad was there, and that as he came through the barracks, a soldier came out of the shower, and he had a towel, and he held it around his waist, and he saluted General Patton. And General Patton, as my dad tells the story, and I would not doubt it, because every time I doubted my dad's stories, they all proved true. He said that General Patton took his glove and slapped that the chest of that soldier with his glove, and he said, "I believe you're supposed to stand at attention." And he dropped the towel and stood at attention.
That's good. That's good. And a great photo of John Wayne.
Well, John Wayne came to Tulsa, and I'm going to say it was 1959 or 1960, and I've never Googled that, but it was during the time, I'm pretty sure, this is what I think, of the Alamo, the movie The Alamo, and John Wayne had put all of his fortune, most of it, into the making of that movie, and I think he may have come to Tulsa seeking some oil money to help back that movie. I don't know for sure, but I do know that my dad was getting ready to go to the airport, and he said, "Come on and go with me." And one of my parents' friends' daughter was also there. She's 2 years older than I am. He said, "Come on and go with me." And we said, "What are you going to do?" And he says, You'll see." And we drove out to the old airport. We went with him. We drove out to the old airport. There was a huge crowd in front of that old airport. My dad was able to drive right up, and with his big camera box, we followed him in, and they just made way for him. And there was a press room in that old airport. And we walked in there, and both of our jaws dropped, because there was the Duke, John Wayne, who stood tall and so friendly, laughing. He and Glenn Dobbs were friends. They had played football across from each other. John Wayne, I believe, played for Southern Cal, and Glenn, of course, for TU. And at the end of that assignment, my father said, "Mr. Wayne, would you mind having a picture taken with my son and his friend?" And I can still remember his cigarette lighter clicking as he had just lit a cigarette, and he clicked that shut, that lighter, put it in his pocket, took the cigarette from his mouth, shoved his hat up just a little bit, put his arms around the two of us. He said, "Why no, come on, kids." And we stood there and had our picture made. I keep that picture by my desk now. I still enjoy that because John Wayne, there was only one John Wayne ever on this earth, and I do respect him.
And you're talking about that as if you were there right now, aren't you?
I am. I can hear it. I can hear that lighter.
So he would take you on assignments, and you.
Yes, and you'll see that he took me as a little baby boy too. But about Life magazine, I would say that there were two stories about that I shouldn't forget. One was canceled by the family, by Mr. Chapman. And it was he'd been hired to go to the ranch, the Chapman Barnard Ranch, and I think it was Mr. Chapman. It could have been Mr. Barnard. I had to find out which one was probably a little bit more demanding, maybe. But before that ever made it to the magazine, they were able to cancel it. He didn't want to have that publicity. The pictures are of the real cowboys doing their work, and my dad had a story about one of the pictures he was trying to take of a cowboy, and he was posing a little bit because of the inability to stop action like he'd like to because of the limitations of film and cameras at that time. But all of a sudden, Mr. Barnard, I think it was Mr. You know what, I'm going to have to ask the family. One of them rode up, jumped off of his horse, big cloud of dust, grabbed my father by the collar and said, "Don't you ever stop my cowboys from working. They have important things to do. You leave them alone. You can take pictures from the side, but don't bother them and pose them." So that was part of that story that developed there. The other one that I remember is Mr. Chapman and Mr. Barnard with their horses, full length, and in the middle is the ranch manager holding his hat up high above his head. My dad had asked him, "How do you get to be the foreman of this ranch?" He says, "I'm the toughest guy. Anybody who can beat me can have the job." So that's how it was toughness. His name was Ben Johnson, the father of Ben Johnson, who would become an Academy Award-winning movie actor.
Wow.
He took a load of horses from the Chapman Barnard Ranch to Hollywood for movies. And he would look after the horses. And he got out there and he says, "This is a lot easier work than back there on the ranch." But that story needs to be told. Guy Logston did tell it. It's on film.
The Ben Johnson, who was foreman, you said was the father of the actor.
Yes, and they look identical.
They were just, okay, and then they drove, the cattle?
The Chapman Barnard Ranch, I guess, made a deal to deliver a herd of horses to Hollywood, and somebody had to look after them. Let me finish that story then because Ben Johnson is very important. It tells a lot about Oklahomans and about their morals and their will and their strength. A movie came out in the 60s, late 60s, I believe, and it was called The Last Picture Show. And I think that director, he has quite a name too. He wanted Ben Johnson for this one role. And Ben Johnson read the script and he said, "That's a dirty movie, I'm not going to be in it." And he called him twice more, "Please, no, it's a dirty picture show. You can have it." Then this Howard Hawks or whoever that would have been, I'll have to look that up, called him and said, "Ben," he said, "Yes, Mr. Hawks, what can I do?" He says, "Well, I have a favor to ask. There's a movie role that you're the only person on this planet that can play that role." He says, "I'll do it for you." And he says, "It's The Last Picture Show. And they're going to give you a percentage of the take, and I'm going to give you a big salary. He said, Mr. Hawks, I don't want money off of that. He says, just pay me the standard, whatever the movie actors guild pays, that's all I want. And the only other thing I want is to be able to control the words that come out of my mouth. I'm not going to talk dirty. And he did that. He got an Academy Award for it.
And the movie was
The Last Picture Show.
Right.
And Sybil Shepherd was in that and did swim naked, which, of course, as a young man, made me want to see the movie. So I have seen the movie, and I've seen Sybil Shepherd dive off that diving board at the high school naked. But Ben Jonson said something at the very end of that to Guy Logsdon. He says, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And I thought, wow, that's a great Oklahoman and a great model to follow.
We should say that Guy Logsdon, of course, became a great historian in music and an expert on Woody Guthrie, and we have his story elsewhere here on voicesofoklahoma.com, and he was a librarian at Tulsa University, as a matter of fact. Your father persuaded Humphrey Bogart to
Yes.
in a trench coat. Tell us that story.
Well, I don't know too much about it, but I know I can see it in my mind. Tulsa, was the oil capital of the world, so there were some premieres here of movies, and I'm sure it's because there's Oklahoma money, and Tulsa money was probably helping to supply the funds to get them produced. But Humphrey Bogart came to town, and this would have been in his young career. When asked by my dad if he could take his picture, he said yes, and my dad started to pose. He says, no, let me show you what I'd like to do. He took him over to the side of the street there, and it was kind of dark outside at that point in time, and he pulled up his coat, and he put a cigarette in, and he pushed his hat up a little bit, and then he said, now I'm going to put my cigarette in here, I'm getting ready to light this match. When I put it up to the cigarette, try to capture that. So the light from the match was to light his face very dramatically, and I'm sure that came from Hollywood, and but just something else.
So Humphrey was directing that picture.
Yeah, he was, yeah. And my favorite story about a movie actress coming to Tulsa, Dad went out to the old airport to take her picture at the airport. My mother was visiting. They weren't married yet, so this is late 30s, early, before 1940. This movie actor showed up, and he was able to make contact and take a picture, and she said, well, how am I supposed to get in? I think it was the Orpheum Theater. And they looked around, and nobody was there. And my dad said, well, my girlfriend and I are going back to Tulsa. Do you want me to give you a ride? And she said, sure. And so before they got in the car, or I think before they got in the car, he took a picture of my mom with this woman, this actress, movie actress. And they took her downtown and were able to get her to the people that she needed to be with. And the next day, my dad had developed that film and made a print and given it to my mother. And my mother looked at it and could not stand the way she looked in the picture, and she tore it up. And then she says, I want that negative. I'm going to destroy it. I don't want anybody to see me looking like that, especially next to somebody so beautiful. I wish that I could see that picture. I can kind of see it in my mind's eye. But that was a very young actress who was appearing in a movie, and I think it was called Alice Bluegown. That's all I can kind of remember. But she played a dramatic role in that movie, and it was not a success. But she would go on to great fame as a comedy actress with red hair by the name of Lucille Ball.
You had me sitting at the edge of my seat like our visitors who listen to this will be.
Isn't that a great story?
It is a wonderful story.
I love that story. I should have been writing things down every day.
But you've got them in your head and in such great detail. You lived in McFarland Mansion. Your father had his business in McFarland Mansion. Talk to us about that.
Well, my father always was looking around for as we started out at 1722 South Boston in an old house, which I can just remember the porch as a little boy. I can remember one of my dad's assistants. This would have been probably about 1951, 52, and I was sitting on a wooden porch, the side railing that was a foot wide, made of wood, in the sun, and one of the assistant photographers, I think his name was Jack, came out and he brought a little magnifying glass, and he said, "Let me show you what you can do with this." And he took the magnifying glass and he made a pinpoint of that light, sunlight, coming through the magnifying glass onto the wood, and all of a sudden smoke started coming up. So that was one of my first memories as a little boy. But that would have been taken away, that porch. Dad built a beautiful front entryway that would allow for a division for a photography studio on the north side and a reception area and display area on the south side. And then they put up some steps that would allow you to go up to the old house, and that became my mother's office area, which was not really big. And there was a door off of that went into the dark room. And then there were French doors that went into our living area, which was a living room, a nice fireplace, ultimately a TV, dining room, kitchen, one bathroom, the master bedroom for my mother and dad, then stairs up, and my sister and I had bedrooms upstairs. She was on the south and I was on the north. We grew up next door till I was about 6 to Joe and Mary Lou Mobley. And Joe was an enterprising man who tore down his house and bought the house next door and tore that down and built a building there, which would first house Mary Lou's bakery and Grindstaff's dry cleaners. And so I grew up next door to a bakery. I grew up down the street from a Glencliff Dairy Depot, and at the other end was a neighborhood Safeway. And I can say that I was somewhat pudgy because I had lots of goodies on that one street, and the bakery was right next door.
And that street was?
South Boston, 1722 South Boston.
Okay, then how do we get into the McFarland Mansion?
Well, so my dad was always looking for a home that would have authentic backgrounds to work with. And so he'd already looked at a couple during the years. He was very successful in photography. As I say, Dad was a great photographer. Tulsa was his home. He loved it, and the Tulsans loved him. One day, in 1969, early 69, a young lady was having her bridal portrait made in her home. My dad had been there before to take pictures, and at parties. It's a beautiful home at 1610 South Carson, the McFarland Mansion, as it is called. It's actually, by John Brooks Walton, is called the McCormack McFarland Mansion because the McCormacks were in there longer than anybody else ever. The Chapmans were the first to live there after the McFarlands. That was Mrs. Chapman's parents. And anyway, my dad was up there taking pictures of Christy Seeger, and her bridal portrait. She lived there. And at the end of that session, Mrs. Seeger said to my dad, "Well, we're getting ready to move. I'm going to move into the 2300. I'm going to put this on the market." And he said, "Well, Mrs. Seeger, let me go down and get my wife." And he did, and came back up the hill from 1722 South Boston to 1610 South Carson. They heard the price, they shook hands, and that was that. And in April of 1969, my parents had obtained the great McFarland Mansion, and when I came home from school, I was very impressed, but I was still thinking about being a dentist. 2 years later, when I was having to wait around for dental schools, I started working for them in that house, and it was a beautiful home to work in, and it was a great time to spend most of my adult life there. We were there for almost 40 years.
You lived there?
No, no one lived there until about 1979. Then my parents moved from their house out here, and they were going to start traveling a little bit. I was helping to run the business by then, and they were going to do some traveling. They had a little condominium over in Hot Springs Village. They loved Arkansas and the races, and so they moved into the second floor, and we're going to travel, be kind of like their lock and leave in a way place. And shortly after they moved in, she was discovered to have breast cancer. So they only lived there for about a year and a half before she died. And then I moved in there when I graduated from college in 1972, and I lived on the top floor, which was just wonderful, and actually lived there for 8 years on the top floor of the old McFarland mansion.
So it was your place of business and your place of residence.
It would kind of just the same place that we had started in a way.
Tell our listeners who the McFarlands were.
Well, Mr. McFarland was a great, great rancher, cowboy who became fabulously wealthy oilman. Mr. McFarland and his wife, of course, very giving, would, through their lives, establish the McFarland Library. There's a McFarland Methodist Church in Norman, which also tells a lot about the McFarlands, because in their travels they had stopped in Norman, and Mrs. McFarland had a baby boy who was not well, and the Methodist women in Norman, Oklahoma had been so giving and loving to Mrs. McFarland and that baby, and it did die, that Mr. McFarland would remember those Methodist women in Norman and built a beautiful stone structure that is still there today in Norman, the McFarland Methodist Church. John Brooks Walton, getting back to that, the architect kept wanting to include that home in his books, and my dad kept saying no. And the reason, my dad finally told me one day at lunch why he didn't want that to happen. He said, if that gets publicized, then the city will come in and increase the taxes on our property. So that was the reason. My sister talked him into it the year before the last book that came out that John Brooks Walton had done, and he said okay. My sister talked him into it, but my dad died a month before the book came out. Anyway, in that book, John Brooks Walton appreciated my dad so much, and that we had been there the longest, that when he came to name that house, he called it the McCormack McFarland Mansion, because we'd been there longer. I thought that was sweet of him.
And I've interviewed John Brooks Walton, and we have his interview here on our website, voicesofoklahoma.com. I got to circle back here. Lita Chapman married
her cousin.
First cousin.
Yes, is Mr. McFarland's sister's son. But
didn't that cause a few ripples in the community?
I don't think so. I think that there have been a lot of cousins in previous generations, possibly. I know that this was not a highly populated area. Plus, they lived in a different world than most people by that point in time. That house was built in 1917. I'm not sure how old Lita was at that point. I know my dad did portraits of them, of Lita and Mr. Chapman. Nice portraits, very beautiful portraits. The Alan Chapman was adopted because of that, though. So they
knew they weren't going to have children.
I think that was it.
So they adopted Alan.
Yeah. I can't speak for the family. But
the point is, they didn't have children.
Yeah, as far as I know, that Alan was adopted, and I think it may have been because of that. I don't want to speak out of turn, though. I just know that when you go around town, you see the McFarland name here and there, then you see the Chapman name everywhere, but that's all one family.
And we have the story of Alan Chapman on our website because Donnie Pittman, who oversaw their foundation and still does, told the story of Alan when Don was very young and they became attached and became an aide to Alan.
Oh,
so
okay.
I've actually told you something maybe you didn't know. Huh?
Yes.
And then we should say you were married and to your wife, and her name is?
I am married to Diane Ruggles, Patricia Diane Ruggles. We married in 1981 on Valentine's Day. We both had been married previously. I wound up adopting Diane's two daughters, and we've been married 38 years and celebrate our love every year on February 22nd when I was late for a blind date that neither one of us wanted to go on. I was watching the American hockey team beat the Russians for the first time in the Winter Olympics, and I just couldn't leave the TV, and this was before they had TVs in restaurants and bars. So I just kept looking at my watch and thinking, well, I've got to go. Finally, I did go in 20 minutes late, and we fell in love and married a year later. But that was February 22nd, 1980.
And you have children?
I adopted Nicole and Lisa. Lisa is now 48 years old. Nicole is 40. We have 7 grandchildren.
Well, you are a historian yourself.
It's too much, isn't it?
No, it isn't. It's just remarkable what you have remembered. And thank you for this session.
It's impassioned on me because I love this city, but I love my mom and dad.
You do. Well, this has been fun.
Well, I've enjoyed it too.
And you and I have talked about doing this for a long time when we finally did it, and maybe this will be the first session. We'll do some others. Okay?
Well, I hope so.
You have been listening to the Voices of Oklahoma podcast. Stories taken from the oral history website, voicesofoklahoma.com. At the website, you will discover an array of storytellers. Many you will know. Some will be new to you, but all will be worth your time. This work depends on listeners like you, who are interested in learning about the great people of Oklahoma. Our website provides an opportunity to donate to this 501c3 project, which preserves Oklahoma history, one voice at a time. voicesofoklahoma.com.